You're watching Established Chernobyl.
That answers your question.
Hello, and welcome back to Let's Be Elements. I'm Jack Skellington, and me, Sally. And welcome back to our Let's Be Elements again with the undead element. So, today we're gonna take a look to Skellington Warriors Sega Saturn review.
Ooh, crunchy.
Well, before you're gonna start, but even though these undead elements, ghost types, and even dark types, but not unless you get the skeleton, you gotta be here. Some spooky, scary skeleton. Thank you. But seriously, let's watch the undead video about the Sega Saturn review of the Skellington Warriors.
Sega Lord.
One of the interesting things about being a Sega Saturn owner back in the day was getting games that were multi-platform. Sometimes you'd get a title that may not be quite as pretty as the PlayStation counterpart, yet it was still fun to play and a great experience.
Don't be quick.
Then there was stuff that just immediately fell into the garbage category and made the hardware
Oh,
look
of course.
bad. Games that looked like
Still got the
crap,
undead
ran like
element
crap,
too.
maybe even had
But
various
I'm a
modes
ghost.
and features stripped away. It was
I'm
kinda
just
like a
calling
game of
me.
craps.
I'm
Sometimes the dice
Casper.
rolled your way, and
And so
sometimes
do
it just
you.
wasn't your day. Among these multi-platform
Welcome to our
releases
show,
was the
Casper.
category of licensed games,
Thank you.
or what was basically a property
But
from another
I
form
have
of
a
media, such as
I have a
movies,
little
comic
thing to
books, or
do.
even a TV series. These games were often less than stellar themselves, and churned out with minimal effort to cash in on the license.
Man,
Perhaps one
you
of the
got it out
stranger
about
releases
time.
to fall into this topic
But
was
no,
1996's Skeleton
but
Warriors.
this is like a
This
Skeleton
1994
Warrior
cartoon,
edition.
toy line, and comic book was extremely short-lived. It only ran for 13 episodes on TV, and the toys were gone shortly thereafter. So when it showed up for the Saturn and PlayStation almost 2 years later, you can imagine my surprise. In this episode, we will be looking at Skeleton
the
Warriors for the
Sega
Sega
edition.
Saturn, and
That's
find
like a
out
classic
whether it's worth your
one.
time or not.
Skeleton Warriors for the Sega Saturn.
This one was developed by Neversoft, the developer who would go on to do games like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and some of the Guitar Hero games. This was their very first title and the only one they developed for the Sega
That's the
Saturn.
very first
The
title
Skeleton
in
Warriors
this
TV
game.
show was created by Gary Goddard, the guy that directed the 1987 film version of Masters of the Universe. The story revolves around
Oh,
two factions
really?
fighting for the Lightstar Crystal.
That's just an
immense
action.
power source that's capable of granting
Pretty
its bearer
good show.
control of the planet. During their initial struggle, the Lightstar was broken into two pieces, one controlled by the evil Baron Dark, and the other by the righteous Prince Lightstar. The destruction of the crystal's original form corrupted Baron Dark's form into an undead skeleton, who also has the ability to turn other people into his
Oh, that's
undead
Slimer.
minions. And so the
The
story
green
begins.
slime
The gameplay
ghost
here is of the
from
action
Ghostbusters.
side-scrolling 2.5D
Or
variety,
even the animated
or
cartoon
to sum it up
show,
a bit
The
simply,
Real
it's a hack and
Ghostbusters.
slash game. You have multiple ways to attack. A basic standing
this
attack that can be
film
aimed upwards,
is-
a
I don't
downward
know, man,
thrusting
but
move that
this
allows you to
film
bounce
is
on your
so
enemies as you damage them,
spookable.
as well as a few different
What
projectiles.
am I gonna say that's
These
spookable, devil?
projectile-based attacks rely on heartstones that
nothing's
are
pay
dropped by
attention.
enemies when they
But
die.
I'm
Should you not
just
pick up the heartstone in
evil.
time, the destroyed enemies can regenerate and
Evil
continue their
Shmisha.
attack.
What are you
Double
doing,
tapping
guys,
the
out
left
there?
and right direction also allows
Guys,
you to
we're
run.
black.
Rounding out the moveset is a block for the harder enemies and the ability to grab onto platforms to gain access to higher areas. Stages scroll left to right and combine 3D elements to give the illusion of death. Enemies constantly barrage you with both melee and ranged attacks, often popping up out of every direction to score cheap hits.
Now
Aside
what?
from dropping heartstone ammunition for your projectiles, they also frequently drop life replenishment. Every so often, you'll also encounter a third-person rocket bike level that uses a polygon engine and
talk
scrolls
about
forward.
that 3D
Here
game.
you blast your way through enemy vehicles
we're
with a
coming
rapid-fire
through a
gun
3D
and
gamer.
heat-seeking missiles. These stages are
But
short and have the same items to
how's
collect as the side-scrolling
How's
portions.
horrified. Still got heads. Harsh violent.
The visuals of Skeleton Warriors are pretty good. They use a combination of pre-rendered sprites against both 2D and 3D backdrops. The sprites are very well animated and the scrolling is buttery smooth. There's a fair bit of variety in the stages as well. You get to do battle in caves, snowstorms, enemy bases, bridges, and a few other places to change up the atmosphere a bit. You get cool touches like enemies in the background throwing attacks at you, transparent fog in the foreground, and some really cool line scrolling in places that really jazz up the background detail.
Well,
Sprites are
jazzed
large
up.
and the engine can take a ton of them without a bit of slowdown. Destroying the bad guys
Well,
results in
let the
pieces of
games
their
go,
bodies
moving
being
on.
strewn all over the place. A nice if
IJ,
somewhat
come on.
distracting addition.
You're just
The
anyone
overall
playing a game?
presentation is rather dark across the
But I
entire
mean, it
game,
makes any
no matter
sense
the
with
stage,
you.
which often results in smaller enemies like
Well,
bats
that extremely-
getting lost if you're moving fast.
That
I'm typically
extremely
not a fan of
hot.
pre-rendered graphics, but here it's actually pretty nice looking. The color is really good and doesn't have the usual dithering associated with the style. Most of you will
Hey,
likely come
ditto
away
on that.
pretty happy with the way it looks and
still
performs.
sticking around you. Still sticking around. Man, talk about fighting. But actually, Halloween 204, well, I guess will be coming soon in this October. But anyways, you'll think about it. Well, I guess I have an eye on that.
This section is usually where I mouth off a bit about the sound and music.
Sugar
No
hit.
need for that with Skeleton
Like you.
Warriors. Tommy freaking Tallarico was on the team.
Okay.
And that's all you need to know.
But how am I supposed to get on that battle? What? It's like a skeleton battle. Well, you take that, you skeletons. Well, I guess I am to try out for the undead zone. Still tragic on that snow area. This video game is no usually required. It's good for what it's good.
The major problem that dogs Skeleton Warriors is that it takes far too long to give you any real variety in its gameplay.
Problem.
For well over half the game, you spend the majority of your time just hacking away at enemies and little else. These enemies are not placed to provide any real challenge, and often just quickly pop onto the screen and score really cheap damage. You think that this would make things really hard, but it doesn't. The developers knew this was cheap, so they just cranked up the amount of health that gets dropped to compensate. This basically results in just barreling through these early stages with really no strategy. Just kill everything, collect the life, and move on. There's no well-designed platforming to overcome, no major obstacles to deal with, and no real use for your secondary weapons or that block button. Your projectile attacks are particularly useless early on because they use so much ammo to kill the regular bad guys. The more powerful options use even more. You can quickly run through an entire stock of Heartstones in mere seconds. By the time you do encounter some of the better moments of Skeleton Warriors, you are well deep into the game and it's almost over. Most of you will never make it that far because once the boredom sets in, you'll hit the power button.
Man, that was a big hit.
That's actually a shame because once Skeleton Warriors does get things going,
Would
you
you?
see some real potential in it. Stages start
Tough
to have you
luck,
do some real
kiddos.
platforming, using your block more, and even using platforms to climb across maze-like design. But even these stages are over before you know it, and you're sitting at the last boss with the entire thing almost completed. The worst of the gameplay definitely comes in the form of the rocket bike levels, however. These barren and awful-looking additions are here for fluff and little else. They all look the same except for some palette changes and offer no real variation in enemies, purpose, or challenge. Once you see the first one, you've seen them all.
Man, you talk about that Star Trek stuff.
For those of you interested, the PlayStation version
But
is
even though the
largely
Sega
identical
Saturn
in
and
terms of stage design,
PlayStation
music, and
still got a lot
gameplay,
of versions
but suffers
about
some
that.
major cutbacks in visuals. You lose environment effects like fog and snow, you have less parallax scrolling,
really?
and an overall feeling of emptiness to the stages. There's some slowdown here that wasn't in the Saturn game, and the image is softer as well. It was a rare time when a Saturn multi-platform release thoroughly beat the pants off the PlayStation version visually.
Different game consoles!
I remember the very first time I saw Skeleton Warriors. It was in a Game Fan magazine, and they went on and on about how great it looked and how awesome the gameplay was. I was so looking forward to it when it finally released. I mean, the Saturn was supposedly made for this kind of stuff. How could it not be something special? As it turns out, this was originally meant to be a 16-bit Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo release. It was decided mid-development that it would be better to take advantage of the 32-bit machines, and I definitely think that had an effect on its overall quality. The early stages are your usual run-of-the-mill hack-and-slash gameplay that was commonplace during the fourth generation of consoles. The later levels that show some real sparks of creativity were developed later.
Well, Carrie the Ghost,
essentially two
or
games
Carrie
of different
Kruger.
quality. And that's
But
why
I'm terrified with that skeleton,
Skeleton
spooky,
Warriors
scary
has more
skeleton.
challenge, more variety, and more
Look
things
at
to
me,
do
you're
in the later
chewing your
game. So if you can last
bones.
that long, you may come away liking it quite a bit. If you get bogged
know
down in the
about
early
that.
stages and grow weary of bashing the same enemies and simply walking left to right, you'll probably come away quite disappointed. Of course, if you were a kid back when this came out, you likely loved it because it looked so good and was so easy to get into.
But I guess
Overall, I
I'd
feel
love
it's
to
a
play
decent
this.
game for fans of this type of gameplay.
What's this
Bordering
game
on
about?
a good game if you can last to the second half.
Wait, is there
If you are finding
Skeleton
the early
Warriors?
stages just too much of a slog, try cranking up
Man,
the difficulty a bit,
are these
as this may
games
help
are
slow
about
down the
skeletons?
gameplay and require you to pay closer attention
Yep.
to how you deal with the enemies. While
Well,
it doesn't
I just
suffer
wish it
quite
was
as much as
gone.
many of the other licensed games of the era, I wouldn't call it a Saturn classic, nor would I say it's completely forgettable. It's one
Well,
of those
this is
middle-of-the-road
so
titles
honorable.
that often falls into the love it
Would you?
or hate it categories. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time. Well, and that's about it. Maybe the next element is...
for watching.